Bridget, welcome. What did you bring?
Today I brought my favorite quote by Maya Angelou. It goes something like this. What you're supposed to do when you don't like a thing is to change the thing. And if you can't change it, then change the way you think about it.
I like that. Thank you. And Reba, what did you bring?
I brought a banner like from 30 years ago. Speak now or forever hold your peace.
Nice. 30 years ago. It looks like it's in good shape. All right, we can't wait to hear more about that. Well, first of all, welcome to the two of you, and welcome to the rest of you who might be viewing or listening to this, to the podcast, Not Quite Strangers. My name is Valerie Hope, and I am your host. And I'm so happy that I keep finding more and more people who are not quite strangers, who don't know each other, but will meet on this show and have a meaningful conversation. And the whole idea is to continue to build connection, inspire curiosity, maybe even challenge the status quo if we're lucky. And also, more than anything, to give you all an opportunity to experience and learn different lifestyles, different points of view, and the two of you guests get an opportunity to maybe even make a new friend. No pressure though, because if you don't get along, there's no commitment after this. You're just here for the hour and then we're good. We're set. But I do want to share that I've known the two of you for quite a while. Bridget, you and I worked at Hyatt, the Grand Hyatt DFW together years ago. I don't know, maybe like 15 years ago.
15, 16 years ago.
Yikes. Oh my goodness. It's been a long, long time and in and out of touch. And then over the last year, we've connected a couple of times around some work that your organization was doing or looking to do in diversity and inclusion. So we've had a few conversations and it's been really great to reconnect with you after all this time. You're also based here in Texas. So
yes,
thank you
Austin,
for saying
Texas.
Yes, Austin. Keep it weird. And then Reba, you and I have known each other for 4 years now, I think, going on 4 years. You were my coach at the Berkeley Executive Coaching Institute way back when I was getting certified, and we've been close friends ever since, and also colleagues now. We work on some projects together, and you and I have had also very meaningful conversations too, and I thought, oh my goodness. I knew the two, well, Reba, I've known you were going to be on the list for a long time. I know, although you were really apprehensive about being on a podcast. And then Bridget, when you and I connected, I don't know, maybe a couple months ago, I was like, yes, I know exactly who I'm going to introduce to Reba. And the two of you specifically, we can get into a little bit more, but specifically because this whole idea of diversity and inclusion, diversity, equity, and inclusion has always been there, but over the last 12 months or so has been amplified, right, to almost a fever pitch in some cases. And I know the two of you are in your own ways committed to making a difference in your organizations or in your communities. And I thought, oh, what better way to have a conversation that kind of lands this. And I'll have to say too, at least in my world, the conversation has focused a lot on race, right, Black, white. But both of you belong to the LGBTQ plus community. And I thought, not really had much conversation around that. At least in my space, I haven't heard that much. So I thought, maybe this is a good way to start and see what does the D&I movement contribute in the LGBTQ plus community, what's working, what's not working, from just your experience, right? So that's one of the other reasons that I thought this might be a really interesting conversation, because I get to learn, and those who might be listening and watching too. So with that said, anything you want to say to that? Anything comes to mind after I share that?
Well, I mean, in terms of equity, diversity, equity, inclusion, I think that you have to look through a lens that incorporates LGBTQIA plus. Because of, intersectionality and how groups of, different races, different backgrounds, there are different barriers. And that unconscious bias is there. It may not necessarily be, something that's everyone doesn't have the same experience, just because my experience at Hyatt, maybe, and your experience at Hyatt might be slightly different. just because of, maybe intersectionality and how we approach different things or different aspects of our life. So I do think that you have to incorporate LGBTQIA plus in that framework of DEI to ensure that, equity and inclusion of all groups.
Got it. All right. Before we start throwing around all the acronyms, we already know that DEI is diversity, equity, and inclusion. All right. LGBTQIA plus. All right. Break it down for us.
Sure.
L, lesbian,
L is lesbian, gay,
bisexual,
bisexual, transition, transsexual,
transgender,
transgender, yes,
transgender.
I is intersex, and Q is queer.
Queer. Okay. Is
Queer and questioning,
LGBTQIA.
right?
The Q,
Queer
questioning.
and questioning, those who are still exploring.
Queer and questioning. What is it? IA? Intersectionality? No.
Intersex.
Intersex.
Intersex. And then the A?
Asexual.
Oh, that's a lot. There's a lot. And it's important stuff, but I was like, okay, let's break it down in case people don't know. Before we get into the nitty gritty, because I think that will be an interesting part of this conversation, I'm curious about why you both said yes to being on a podcast. From what I understand, this is the first time ever that you've appeared on one. What had you say yes to this experiment? To talk about a topic like this that could potentially be kind of hefty. Reba?
Well, I have to say, I'm not always a fan of things being recorded forever and ever, right? So I'm kind of a shy Facebook user, and I'm conscious that what you put out there lives forever, lives for, until data goes away. And I signed up for it because I trust Valerie Hope, and because I do think it's a time, as I pull out this banner from like 30 years ago, speak now or forever hold your peace. It's really time for all of us to step up. Audre Lorde, my quote is, life is very short and what we do has to be done in the now. So I feel this sense of urgency. I feel it for my kids. I feel it for the planet. We all need to step up, because when you talk about in your cracking open of the opening, there's a history of racism and hatred and since time immemorial. So there's a long story. It's not just new on the scene. So the LGBTQ plus community has a whole history too. So finally there's space to talk about this.
Well, thank you for trusting me and the sense of urgency that you feel. I think everybody is like, there's got to be something for us to do. And I would say that I'm sure I've shared this when I talked to both of you individually. I was like, I feel like I need to contribute something to this conversation. I don't know what it is, but I don't necessarily see it as everything that is out there. I think my lens is different. My experience living as an immigrant in this country, as a Black woman in this country is different. But so that doesn't, I don't want to diminish those conversations or diminish the approach. But I also thought, one of the things that I feel so grateful and so fortunate and blessed to have is a community of people from all over the planet and have meaningful conversations with. Even conversations that I may not be comfortable or may be very well versed in, but I think this is the kind of platform that I thought could support not only me, but also anyone that might be listening or what. Actually, maybe not that bad. Maybe I could ask my neighbor a few questions. Maybe I can have a conversation with my uncle or my nephew, or I feel like there's opportunity to be just curious, to be compassionate. And challenge. So thank you for saying yes to that. And Bridget, what about you? I mean, clearly after 15 years, you don't owe me anything. But what had you say yes?
Really the same reasons Reba said yes. I said yes because I trust you, and I respect you. And so I felt safe, agreeing to this discussion, and knew that, based on our previous work relationship, that, I could trust you with how you would deliver this and the platform that you have.
Wow. Well, no pressure. Great. No, I don't. I do feel, I think part of what makes me excited about these types of conversations, that there's really been very little setup. I think I told the two of you, just bring an item, object, or quote or something that represents how you tied or connected to the topic, and then let's see where the conversation unfolds. So speaking of that, Bridget brought a quote. What is it about that quote that makes it so meaningful to you today?
Well, it reminds me of something my grandmother used to say, and she still says. My grandmother's 96 years old, and she still says that complaining doesn't ease the pain. And that really, I've heard her say that all my life. And so Maya Angelou's quote really resonates with me, because complaining doesn't make it better. It doesn't make you feel better. So why bother complaining? If you can't change the problem or change that thing that you don't like, then change how you think about it. Because that's the one thing I think we have control over, is our thoughts and how we feel about a thing. So control what you can, and control how you feel about it and how you approach it.
How does that tie to this subject when we're talking about LGBTQI plus, about DEI? Where do you stand on that?
Well, in terms of DEI, we've got a lot of work to do. And I think the thing that has to happen is we all have to approach it. It's not comfortable. It's uncomfortable conversations, but they need to be had, because, for too long, we've been told, don't talk about politics, don't talk about religion, don't talk about race. And so we're ill-equipped to have these conversations. And so they make us uncomfortable. But as opposed to complaining about, continuing to complain about the inequities isn't going to change the inequities, but actually doing some work and being vocal about, pointing out examples for, those who want to be allies, and those who are also committed to the work of dismantling, systemic racism and injustices. So just, reaching across the table, having those conversations, and looking for ways to change it, because complaining about it isn't going to change it.
I'm making it. Reba, I see you nodding fervently. What's on your mind about that?
Let me see. So many things. It's in the work world, it's not comfortable for people to be themselves, So when you said, come on this and talk about what it's like to be a gay woman, a lesbian in the business world. And there's the urgency, because so many people don't feel like they can be themselves, or are profiled and, life threatened on the street because of who they are. I have Asian friends who, are really feeling, just walking on the street, just down a couple miles from where I live, a woman walking on the street. So it's urgent that there's a safe place. So part of it is, maybe the political correctness, or talking appropriately to people and asking the questions, creating space, holding space for awkward conversations. Another part is life and death. It's like we have to change these mindsets. People are dying. As we know, communities have died. Gay women, and men, lesbian women and men, and Black women and men, and now Asian, and always, many, many years, Asian, in Native American, all of these communities are losing their lives due to closed-mindedness, due to lack of access, not knowing anyone. Like, I don't know any gay people. And that's what I came up in. I had no cognizance of gay people. It wasn't until Ellen came out, I had to look it up.
Really?
1997 was one of the first times for me, there was a public acknowledgement that there was a gay person. Time magazine, yep, I'm gay. And so if you don't even see it and know it, then that othering that happens, it's hateful. So it's not just, it's conversation, and it's life and death.
Wow.
It's very dramatic.
I think there's something to be said about the awkward conversations. We've come a long way in the things that we're now talking about, primarily because there's so much access, right? Social media has completely democratized communication. So it's not just controlled by the powers that be or people that have the dollars to spend. I think that's made a huge difference. And yet, to your point, Bridget, we're still ill-equipped to sometimes have the right kind of conversations or in a way that's really empowering to those who really want the information, but also empowering to those who might be, you know, creating a bit of a ruckus, let's say, right? Reba, you brought a banner and you said you had to unearth it after 30 years. What does that banner mean to you? What was it for?
Well, when you said an artifact, I had to think back, I had to mine my memories for this journey, to be honest. I had
Yeah.
to look up that Ellen was 1997, so how long have I been comfortable being out? Not my whole life. No.
No.
I've been, the word closet means to go in a small space and close the door.
Hmm.
So, however, I was blessed to be part of a activist community and still am. And we came together and made this banner, this huge long banner with a rainbow, mind you. So the symbology of the rainbow in the LGBTQ plus community it was a symbol that people didn't even understand necessarily was a
Hmm.
symbol. So we put it together, we're learning, healing, and it says soul sisters in the middle. So these were people who could trust each other to be arrested together. These were people who could go
Wow.
out there on the line and back then San Francisco police said, what was it? Velvet glove, iron fist was kind of their framework. And they,
Oh.
I don't know so much now, but back in the day they were smacking people down. So you had to you had to trust those people on both sides of you. And so this was a banner we would carry to kind of create unity.
Solidarity. Wow. So I'm curious, both of you are from different parts of this country. Is it different being gay in Texas as it is in California? And if so, how? And is it also different? Does race play a part? What's been your experience?
Well, I think for me, of course, Texas is part of that Bible Belt. But I also grew up in a Christian home. So, when I think about intersectionality, being a Christian woman, as I am, but also a queer woman, and just having to wrestle with that myself, and dealing with that myself, and to your point, Reba, I mean, there was some years where I wasn't comfortable just being out, and there were only a select few of my coworkers who knew. I think it may have been 2004, 2005 before I was comfortable, bringing my significant other to the holiday party with me, as my plus one. So there was, that's quite some time, and I think there is some concern about how that will how that might have impacted my career, how that might have impacted, my opportunity to advance. And some of that may have just been paranoia, and may have been misplaced, because I think I was afforded a lot of great opportunities along my career path. I don't think it held me back, but I will say that, I can remember, as a young woman, I wear my hair short. Sometimes I grow it out. Most of the time it's been short, but I can remember in my 20s or early 30s having a cashier say yes sir to me, and I look at them like, really? And now it doesn't bother me so much, because I just realize, they're busy, they're working quickly. It's not meant to be a slight or to be disrespectful necessarily, but it used to take me aback, and it felt a little bit like a punch in the gut. So I did live in Newport Beach, California for a year and a half, but I can't say that my experience there was any different from my experience in Texas necessarily. I've lived in Houston, I've lived in Dallas. I just think I think it depends on where you are. I'm very conscientious about, when I'm in church, and I guess I'm a little more self-conscious in that environment.
Okay, I gotta ask Bridget. So what's Bridget at the supermarket compared to Bridget at church? What would we see if we were following you around with a video?
Well, not much different, really. I mean, what you see now, I think I just kind of crawl into a little shell. I'm a little more shy and a little more reserved in that church environment as opposed to anywhere else. Because I'm pretty fun-loving and easygoing most of the time, and so I think I retreat a little more in a church environment to some degree until I feel that it's a comfortable, safe space. And that's not me walking in, with my rainbow shirt on that I might wear to the grocery store, not wearing that to church. So I, to some in some ways, I guess I am, in my own little closet at church as opposed to showing up as my full self.
That's interesting. So clearly you're not necessarily demonstrating that physically, but do people at church know you're gay?
I don't know.
Wow.
I guess, part of me is like, some people may assume,
Yeah.
but they wouldn't know without, I feel like you can't know a person unless they tell you who they are.
Yeah.
But I won't, I'm not naive enough to believe that people don't make assumptions based on my appearance.
Interesting. Wow. Okay, Reba, I want to get your reaction to that. You look concerned for a moment. You had a flash of, I don't know if that was concern or that was like a resonance, but what was that expression?
Yeah, well, it's interesting how interpretation around gender identity, which is a separate topic. I'm learning so much more about gender identity versus, sexual preference or the whole pansexual, all that language there, that is kind of new to me. My partner, who I've been married to for 29 years, was called Sir when she was 8 months pregnant.
What?
We're talking a big round belly. And she gets Sir a lot. I sometimes get Sir if I'm, more just in my chill gear, out. The environment, Bridget, you talk about church, the environment where I feel fear in for my family, I have 2 teenagers, is when we're camping or when we're out of the Bay Area and we're 2 women with kids. And sometimes there's some very conservative folks, out camping with, guns, etc. And yeah, I feel fearful for my family sometimes. So when you ask what's it like to be gay in Oakland, one would assume super safe, Oakland Bay Area, woo, 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 gay Mecca. But yet, when we were looking for schools for my kids and we said, do you have gay families here? One principal reared back, literally staggered back. Okay, we won't go there. Another principal said, we tolerate anyone. Not my favorite language.
Wow.
So, it's again based on people's experience, but I'm so sure my privilege of being white and being able to hide my gayness for when I've chosen to do that has been, probably a very different experience than Bridget's. Yet there are still, I have friends and family I even know who are coming out as gay and don't yet feel safe to do that. So it's not like it's over. I don't think it's over.
That's fascinating to hear. I wouldn't say that is, I don't know, safer. It's a loaded word, right? But I'm curious about what would you guys consider safety? Like I can get in a church environment where maybe people are much more conservative, or if they're very like the Bible says, you can interpret it in a lot of different ways, but how would you define safety?
I think for me, safety is acceptance. It's not tolerating a person, but accepting a person, and without judgment. And yeah, just that would be safety.
Yeah. Can you give an example, Bridget, of where you feel safe, or what gives you the impression of safety, like you personally?
Let me think about that.
Like you mentioned in 04 or 05, just when you actually introduced your partner at a work event, right? So what was it that you experienced then? What did you notice or hear that made it safe for you or made it appropriate for you to share that part of your life?
Well, I don't know that it was so much of what I'd seen or heard, but at that point, I had gotten to a point, I think, in my career where I didn't feel like it was going to hold me back. I felt like I was around people who respected my work ethic, understood what my talents were and what I brought to the table. And so I felt comfortable that my colleagues would be accepting of who I was, who I showed up as at work, as well as, who I was outside of work. And so the two came together when I was able to, bring my significant other and say, and introduce her that way.
Wow.
And yeah, that felt safe. And maybe part of it was that I was like, okay, I've been promoted to this position, and so they must trust me enough to give me this opportunity that I'm safe to be me. I'm safe to be who I am.
Wow. I had no idea you were going through all that stuff. My goodness. Yeah. Interesting. The process. And Reba, you mentioned also like going camping, for example, or you're more concerned now about your children too. So for you, what does safety look like? And give us an example of when or how you felt safe.
Yeah, I really appreciate what Bridget said in terms of is it safe to take a risk to out yourself at work? Will you lose status, a promotion? I was part of a consulting firm. Any of you know, and I went on a business trip and I came out kind of off business time. And then that was the last time I worked for them. And I was pretty clear it was because I came out. In
Oh,
fact,
wow.
somebody else affirmed that for me. This is many years ago.
Hmm.
I really doubt that would happen now, to be honest. But there is this thing, right, around losing something because of your identity. Obviously, you guys know more about that than I do, I assume. Um, but for safety, for me, I'm not talking about safety when we talked before, safety to awkwardness,
Mm-hmm.
because having a difficult conversation may be uncomfortable. I think we overuse the word safe in terms of conversation.
Yeah.
For instance, I heard I'm doing unlearning, transforming white racism work right now. Um, and a white woman said, I don't feel safe. I don't feel safe. I'm like, hey, look, people of color don't feel safe in most conversations because of the microaggressions, etc. So for me, the safety I'm talking about is physical safety. Like if I'm camping and don't have four walls and I wear a t-shirt that outs me, is the family or this group of men across the way or what, is this other group of people going to um
Harass or
harass? Yeah, is there harassment? And that's certainly not unheard of. I mean, you get it on the
yeah.
street.
So more like
So
physical
yeah,
safety.
I'm talking literally physical safety. That's what I'm talking about.
That's so interesting. It doesn't necessarily compare, but I can draw a thread here because, well, I'm from Panama originally. You guys know that. I immigrated to the US when I was 9. And I've always grown up in a very multicultural, multi-ethnic environment, even in, my dad joined the US military. So we lived in military bases, which, that was kind of normal. And I remember my first crush was Mark Inoue. Sorry, I don't know if you're watching this, Mark, but he were cute. He's Japanese. And we were living in Hawaii at the time. And I never thought that was odd. I never thought that was like, yeah, well, Black woman Black girl from Panama to have a crush on a Japanese guy. I didn't think it was weird or anything until until we moved to Alabama and then lived in a very small community there where there was much more social segregation. And I was just like, and I've always been attracted to foreign men. I don't know if it's the foreign piece of it, but you know, my ex-husband was Argentinian. The last guy I dated was Egyptian. I dated a guy from India. So that's been kind of my world. But I didn't, and again, this does not compare. The level of safety maybe is extremely, the bar is very low for what I'm talking about. But I remember there was a point in time, especially in high school, when I didn't feel comfortable telling people who I had a crush on because they're not African-American men. Sorry, I'm just gonna say it. And at the time, it wasn't like an exclusive, like, no, I don't want to, but it was just not who I was typically attracted to. But I remember feeling really embarrassed about that. I'm like, oh, that's probably not appropriate. You know, we're in the South. And, you know, what does that say about me, you know, being Black? I was called Oreo a lot. I don't know if you know, white on the inside, Black on the outside, in high school several times. So that, I didn't know what to do with it. So I'm like, okay, that's, you know, and then now as I've grown up and our borders have started to, I don't know, they're necessarily more open, but the lines have blurred quite a bit. In my family alone, and I don't know what this is about my family, but my dad's remarried to a woman from Serbia. My older brother is married to a woman from Spain. My younger brother is married to a woman from Vermont. So we have just in the whole 3 interracial relationships right now. And when I was married, there was 4. And it's like, so for us, that's quite normal. And also now we're like, okay, it seems like it's normal for more people more often. So I'm curious about, for you guys, what's felt normal? Like what's been maybe in your, from your youth to now, what are some times when you're like, you know, Reba, you mentioned when you saw Ellen's, you know, cover saying that, yes, I'm gay, that, there's representation, but what have been some moments in your life that you guys can say, this feels normal, or I feel like I belong here, or I don't have to pretend, or something to that extent, that acceptance, maybe.
I would throw in, I'll jump in. I'll throw in kind of 2 areas. One, I live on this really cool street with biracial couples, young couples, people who've lived here forever, people from all over. And we have street days. And whoever shows up, gay couples show up, straight couples show up. And it's no thing. Acceptance is, it's no different.
Yeah.
There's no like, oh, there's no startling, you know, in the way that I got years ago from the principals. I'm just another family. So I think for me, what moved me forward was really having kids. I'd never related to heterosexual couples as much as I did when the kids came, because suddenly the commonality, you know, and being accepted. I have to say, this is like almost 18 years ago. That was a big transition for me, as well as working at places with other gay people versus being the only gay person. So working at places where there were plenty of gay people, no big deal. Then you're one of many.
Wait, so this is interesting. You mentioned your kids were kind of the commonality with heterosexual couples. So, but that was, sounds like 18 years ago, right? That seemed to be the main connection point. But what about now? Do you connect? Do you and your wife connect with heterosexual couples with more ease now, or does I guess the question is, do children make the difference in the connection, or can you now relate as couples in love, or building a family, or, you know, owning property like that?
The whole thing has gone away.
It's gone away.
Gay couple, straight couple, this, that, it's just
There's
disappeared. It's,
nothing.
you know, we live in the Bay Area, we're this, we're that, we're interested. We came together when Trump was elected, our community here, right here in the neighborhood, and before, a lot of support for communities coming. We have a family who's just arrived from Honduras. Everybody's supporting. So this coming together, commonality, that's not about anything. So that's what's normal. I'm a member of a community of people who is taking care of each other. Hallelujah.
That's so cool. Wow. Bridget, are you married?
I'm not. I'm
No.
single.
Okay, got it. And so for you, what's a moment that you can feel that you felt or experienced that what Reba just expressed, like there's no just you hanging
Right.
out at church or wherever.
Well, I was gonna share. Me and my best friend went on a cruise, and I don't want to endorse any specific cruise line, but
This is not a sponsored podcast, so it doesn't
okay.
matter.
So
You won't be making anybody feel bad.
Olivia Cruises, or they are a company that arrange and organize vacations for queer lesbian women. And so in 2016, me and my best friend went on one of the cruises, and it was my first time going on one of their cruises, and it was so much fun because you're literally surrounded by, I'm like, these are my people. These are my people. And so you're completely safe. You can completely just show up as who you are. And so I could be the complete goofball that I am. And everybody was partying together, like, your old friends. It was such a freeing environment because you're in a safe space. But as I was listening to Reba and talk about her neighbors and how they came up together, Texas just had the big freeze. We're calling it snow apocalypse in February. And
snowpocalypse. I called it the ice capades.
Snowvid. So my entire street, we had like 10, 12 inches of snow, and we were out of power for 4 days. And I have the most remarkable neighbors, though. The guy next door knows that, I'm a single woman living here, and he shoveled my entire sidewalk so that I could bring the puppy out for a walk. The puppy didn't want to go out for a walk, but I was appreciative nonetheless. And my neighbor Sheila across the street, if she cooked, she brought me food. And I cooked a gumbo and brought it to Art and Iris next door. And just all of the neighbors were just taking care of each other pretty much all week, just looking out for one another. And that felt really, really good, that we just all, and these are neighbors, of course, that I talk to on a regular basis. So it didn't take that event for us to engage with one another, but it still felt like family. It felt like community, the way everyone was coming together and helping out.
That's fascinating. So this idea of community and family, it just like no difference, right? Yeah. And I think this is the part that I struggle with a little bit, because I saw my dad sent me an article just a couple of days ago. I just graduated from college, and I'd gotten my first job in this small town that I went to high school in. They, were highlighting high school graduates from the area or whatever. So they put this article in the paper, or maybe my mom did. My mom loved to do that kind of stuff. And it said, like, the very first line, and this was in 1990, let's call it 95 or 96. And the first line in the newspaper said something about how, Valerie Hope is, very self-assured, young woman, was 24 years old or something like that. And it said, this is the weirdest thing. It said, she doesn't, or she wouldn't, I'm misquoting here a little bit, but the gist was like, you wouldn't know that she has, you wouldn't think, she doesn't think that she has a handicap because she's Black. And I was like, what? And I did not remember giving the interview. I'm sure I had a conversation, and then back then, I guess it was this thing that, there's somehow a disadvantage being Black. I imagine I was not projecting that, and the reporter is white, at least from the little picture that I saw. And it was just interesting because I think now, maybe back then I didn't care as much, but now I'm like, why do we keep finding these different levels of, talking about microaggressions, right? I never considered it a disadvantage to be anything. I grew up with 3 brothers, so I was always very tomboyish. I'm sure some women thought I was gay, but I was like, no, just kind of a tomboy. But at the same time, I'm like, but hey, cool, great, we can still be friends, right? And then travel also opened my eyes to a lot of different countries and cultures and languages. And so I find myself adapting to wherever I am. And again, just being curious about people and connecting with people. But I think, and I don't know, you guys tell me if I'm off here, but I think in this country, especially, at least in my experience observing, there seems to be a need to have a little bit of definition about who you are and where you belong and what's appropriate and what is not. And in some cases it's an advantage, sometimes it's a disadvantage. Like there's some sort of fairness conversation, which I think is why diversity, equity, and inclusion has been touted as, you know, one of the large topics to address in the workplace. But and this sounds so trite, but like, can we just all get along and feel the kind of belonging that you two described as being with your neighbors? Is that, what do you guys think about that? Because I'm having a hard time having a conversation about this without it like being about this. I don't even know what I said, but it feels really profound and confusing.
Well, I mean, here's my thoughts on what you just said. You know, I'm 47 years old and I've been pulled over many times, usually for speeding. And usually I was speeding. And I've not had the kind of interactions with police officers that result in someone getting hurt. But that doesn't diminish the fact that it's happening, right? It's not my experience.
Yeah.
And so, you know, I can't say all police are bad, nor do I think all police are bad, but we do have an issue. We have an issue when people of color are, you know, pulled over more frequently for, you know, traffic citations, or are just pulled over for suspicion and wind up, you know, dead or wind up incarcerated. And they're not even sure why they're there. So I think, to your point, I agree. Can't we all get along? I just think that, you know, in terms of frame of reference, right? Sometimes you look at the world through the experiences that you've had, and I think, you know, at least in, you know, but when I look back across, you know, everything that I've seen happen and unfold on the news in my lifetime, going all the way back to Rodney King and coming all the way forward to, you know, what we have seen of late. And it's not that it's happening more frequently, it's just getting recorded, right? Yeah. So we get to see it. It's been happening all along. And so, you know, I have to say, even though that's not been my experience, it's happening. And I, you know, I can be a part of the solution by speaking up and saying things have got to change. We need, you know, we need better laws on the local, local city level to address police brutality and excessive force, and, you know, getting resources reallocated so that people with mental illnesses are being addressed and handled by people who are better equipped to handle those situations. Because a police officer with a taser and a gun is not the person that should be showing up when someone's having a mental crisis, and that's what's happening. So I don't know if that really addressed your question, but that's kind of along the lines that I was thinking, is that I don't think your experience has been, you know, if I'm hearing you correctly, is that you haven't had, you know,
the trauma. I haven't had a traumatic experience around that. Yeah.
Because it sounds like you've been well traveled and had a lot of exposure to a lot of different cultures and had really great experiences in those situations, and that's great.
And to your point, I think that's something I want to be really mindful of saying, that is not about diminishing anyone else's trauma. I get that, right? There's a lot of experiences in life that I have not had that I would hope in the moment, and even people listening or watching this, don't think that I'm any less compassionate because, that does not exist because I've not experienced it. That'd be extremely naive and insensitive. And I also think, is there a way, like, what can we each bring? And this is a question I keep asking myself, even in conversations through the podcast, like, what can I bring to the conversation that just a different facet, just a different perspective that maybe people connect to? Maybe people are kind of like, she's crazy. What is she talking about? Or some people might go, oh man, wow, I feel the same way, but I've not been able to articulate it or express it or explore it or whatever, right? So I want to give voice to that. And I feel like it's not necessarily clear for me either. So these conversations and I appreciate the two of you being so generous, because I feel like part of it is just kind of exploring what is the experience and how can we honor experiences and yet elevate conversation so that it's empowering to all. Reba, what do you think about all this?
The words frame of reference are really pivotal to me. I feel like I know for my lifetime, totally bought into true north, which is maybe not the right thing. Success looks like this. It looks like this white middle class, education, middle of the road thing. That's how you're supposed to live. And I feel like myself and many, many people have bought into that's what success looks like. But the reality is, if we can throw off that construct, if we can throw off that kind of blinders, if you will, that narrow focus, there's an outrageously, diverse, vibrant community. Like the whole gender fluidity thing, to me, I'm learning from my teenagers and the way this generation, Generation Z, is seeing gender. 1 in 6 identify as gender fluid or, non-binary compared to what it might have been back in the day. So I feel like we have to stop looking at this corporate America thing as success and define it for ourselves. Even DEI, the fact that it's put in this bucket as a thing to do versus a lens. I keep doing this because I'm like, let's just open, shed. And I had this experience with a dear friend of mine, kind of a soul playmate. We push each other. He happens to be a African American gay man. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm totally bought into the white male construct. He's like, yeah, take it off. What does that mean? And how would we live? And how do we define, rather than trying to fix this? Why don't we just create that? It's almost like we're going to this old paradigm. We're trying to fix the
old paradigm. Yeah.
Versus cast it off. Create something new. Look at us. We've got a whole world when we're trying to fit into something. I mean, even corporate America is shedding its skin. I mean, look at this. So on some level, we've all got to find a new way to define this. I don't know how to define true north because, again, north is a construct. True is a construct. Like, what's the language that we take on? So that's me on a soapbox around get rid of the old paradigm. Let's create something new. It's way beyond DEI. It's a new way of celebrating every human for every nuance that they are, every facet.
I love that. Shedding the skin. And yeah, this generation has a whole different relationship to identity. I have 5 nieces and nephews that live here in the area. And my 15-year-old niece, I can't remember what we were talking about, but it's, so natural for her to say, they, their, use pronouns, like it depends on the pronoun. And I'm like, oh, you're 15. How are you having these conversations? I'm just having these conversations and it's only been a couple of years, right? So they have a completely different lived experience, right? And it's fascinating. It's fascinating to see how quickly we're evolving. And I think that's really the key. I'm getting that, and just having those conversations, that part of my job, like you said, Reba, is just to open it up and normalize those conversations or those ideas or those perspectives, so that this generation that's coming up has unencumbered and there's no hindrance, right? They have an opportunity to express, to to lead, to engage, to innovate in ways that we are so like, this is, oh, we're just trying to, I have to use reading glasses now. So I have like reading glasses, contacts, and regular glasses, but I'm still, those are the three frames that I have for sight. And there's like another frame, I'm sure there's something that's beyond frames that I don't even know how to manage. So I'm like, I have to get bifocals or trifocals or something. That's the way to get to the vision. I'm like, there's actually probably a lot more freedom, but I don't even know because I've only had this, and, other glasses. So that was very abstract, but it made sense in my head.
It does make sense though, Valerie. I mean, maybe part of that is just removing the frame, right? And if there is no frame, then we're not boxed in.
Yeah.
We spread out without a frame.
Oh.
And I think, to your point, your niece in this younger generation, my niece is 5, and she has friends who have 2 moms and 2 dads, and that's how she's going to grow up, understanding that's an option for family, right? That family is not just mommy and daddy. That family can be 2 moms or 2 dads. That's her parents, or that's his parents. And I love that, because I think that it's that type of, if you can see it, you can believe it, you can be it, that kind of representation matters, and them being able to see this. And Reba mentioned the gender fluid. I think it probably existed 20, 30, 40 years ago, but we didn't see it because of fear of judgment, right? And we all live with some fear of judgment on some level. Valerie, it sounded like your fear of judgment was admitting that you had an attraction to, this certain boy when you lived in Hawaii. It's a fear of judgment by our peers, judgment by our community, judgment by our family. That's what prevents us from being our true selves and removing the mask and just living our lives, free and clear of a frame, of a box.
Frameless existence. Yes. Not because I want to make this an even more serious conversation, but I know, Reba, you've been doing a lot of work around trauma. And I remember, Bridget, you and I had a conversation about some of the things that you had explored or discussed in the workplace where people were experiencing trauma, especially after everything that was happening last summer. And so this may not get the airtime that it needs to, because it's such a whoa. But what I'm curious about is, you guys are, at least in my experience in conversation with you, going beyond the frame in your own life, right? And especially sorting through some of the things that are happening kind of in the collective. Reba, with the trauma learning that you're engaging in, Bridget, with the conversations that you're starting up in the workplace, or that you've been mindful of supporting or bringing resources to in the workplace. What has you work so hard? What has you want to make that effort? Reba, we'll start with you.
Well, I'm no expert in trauma on any level. I took a 4-month course on collective trauma healing, and I'm like, oh my gosh. I've always been fascinated by things that are esoteric and kind of understanding the field of collective pain. And to be honest, I've had a number of coachees who are women of color, African American women, and I'm like, do I understand their experience? Or the other people I worked with, how do I not make assumptions? How do I look beyond what I'm seeing here? So it was really self-knowledge, really wanting to understand. I also teach mindfulness. I'm a martial artist and study Qigong. And so collective healing trauma is also where trauma lives in your body, and how we get stuck, emotions stop moving, we get fixated on our trauma and don't move beyond it, etc. An outrageously simplistic description. And as somebody who does somatic coaching, I'm interested in understanding how to help people realize the ways, now we all have this collective trauma of COVID, right? Bridget, you mentioned earlier how we're all kind of in our own little box. And when we go out and connect with people, now we're exhausted. Yeah, we've all kind of shrunk into this frame. Talk about a frame. How
Yeah.
many hours have you spent in
This is my home.
this is,
This
hi.
is it. My Zoom home. Zoom home.
Yeah. So my impetus was
Self-knowledge.
to really educate myself, is to understand people different than me,
Yeah.
and also to understand how Jewish people, lesbian people, Muslim people, people of all races, how are we carrying trauma, not just for this moment, but for my
Yeah.
family and my entire community.
Interesting. So a lot of the self-knowledge in service of the people that you connect with.
Yeah.
Interesting. And Bridget, what about you? I know your role is not necessarily to bring that type of education or those conversations to the workplace, but what motivated or inspired you to take on that role or initiate some of that?
Well, I got involved in the DEI committee at work. And I think primarily because of, as we started this conversation, you can complain or you can do something to make change. You can be a part of the change you want to see. And so, rather than sit on the sideline and say, okay, let's see how we're going to fix this. I wanted to be a part of the conversation because I think that, I've worked with people from all over the world. That's the beauty of hospitality tourism. I've had very diverse groups of colleagues as well as customers and people who believe differently than I believe. But I learned something from them. And they taught me something and about them and their life, but they also taught me something about myself. And so I think we have to remain open and remain curious. And I think that's how we have to approach this work with DEI. It's uncomfortable, but just if we can approach it from a position of no judgment and just curiosity, help me understand why you feel this way, or help me understand why you have this perception. And because we all have our frame of reference, and it has to do with our life experiences. And so I wanted to be a part of the conversation as opposed to just sitting on the sidelines and being frustrated and being upset about it. Be a part of the solution.
Your grandmother would be proud, or
She
I'm sure
would be.
is proud. She is. Man, I now have more questions, but but we're coming to the end of our time together, and I want to zoom out like I typically do in these conversations, and just to find out, how are you feeling now, knowing that an hour ago you were going to have this conversation with somebody that was not quite a stranger, but a complete stranger to you. What are you feeling now?
I feel good. I feel like, it proves it. This discussion has proved that two people can come together and have a conversation, and there are points of that connect, right? We may not have, a dozen things in common, but we may have one or two things in common. And it's finding those commonalities are the ways that we can make uncomfortable conversations a little more comfortable. And get to know our neighbors and expand our community.
I love that, making the uncomfortable even more comfortable. Reba, what about you?
Yeah, I really appreciate Bridget bringing in how you show up in different communities and where you feel embraced and the work you're doing, and how you're willing to push, not complain, but act. And I feel really connected to that. I too feel an urgency, a deep desire to kind of shed these old pictures and find a frameless space. So I'm so happy you're out there doing that. Austin's a really cool place to be. And so it's exciting to think you're over there pushing a more expansive way of bringing people together so that there's fun and there's community and there's ease.
Now, so from the very beginning of this, first time on a podcast to now, what are you taking from this experience? You personally, I got the subject, right? The topic, but you personally, having been on the podcast now for a whole hour, what are you taking away for yourself?
It's not as bad as I thought it would be. It was all right. It was fun. The time did flow by. You are right.
Absolutely.
You're comfortable with this being forever and ever and ever online?
I'm not sure about that.
I'm not sure about that.
I let it go.
She's like, don't go that far. Yeah, I think I found the conversation flowed easily. I've enjoyed the conversation, and it wasn't as scary as I thought it would be. The video component of it, where I want to make eye contact with the two people I'm talking to, but I keep finding myself looking at myself. So that's a little,
That's vanity.
yeah, that is. You're absolutely right.
I look at I know I look weird when I look down because I'm like, just okay, you look all right. Okay.
Yeah. It's hard not to be self-conscious when you're right there on the screen and it's going live.
So that's what you're taking away. Just check yourself out every once in a while. I know. Yeah. I always, I'm completely resistant at dyeing my hair. I used to at one point because especially my dad's side of the family, gray hair is like the thing at a certain age. And I'm like, no, I'm done. But every once in a while I get on video and I'm like, really? is this really what I want to embrace? So I have my moments too. But more than anything, I am so grateful that the two of you not only said yes, but also enjoyed yourselves. I try to create an environment where we don't get too heavy, and this is not an expert panel. It literally is just an opportunity to share experiences and perspectives. And look, I'm also clear that in touching some of these topics or subjects, that one of us, or me specifically, said something that maybe doesn't sit quite well with other people or challenges other people. And I already told y'all in the beginning that this is to challenge the status quo. All right. And my invitation to everyone that's listening and watching is, step out a bit and ask a question that might be, like to your point, uncomfortable or awkward, and just see where it goes. And sometimes even starting with, hey, I feel a little awkward asking this question. That goes a long way. I think people have a lot of grace. And the two of you, I think, demonstrated beautifully how much grace you hold for this conversation. I don't know how awkward it was to meet a stranger and have a deep conversation, but I couldn't tell the difference. So glad. So glad. Now, last question, and then we'll wrap this up. If you were to continue this conversation offline or whatever, what would you want to know? Like, what are you left with that you're still curious about?
I guess I'd want to take the conversation offline with Reba, and I would be curious to know how her teenage kids, how they've experienced this last year in isolation with the pandemic, the shift from in-person school to online school, all of the social unrest, the racial unrest, and I'm just so curious to know how teenagers, how young adults are processing all of this.
Cool. And Reba, what are you left with? What curious question or topic?
Yeah, I'm really interested in Bridget's DEI chops. So here she is, I don't know how you identify, but a woman of color, a Black woman, say, hey, would you do the DEI in my company? What is that like? And what's working? Like, what are you finding? And I'm really curious about, like, what works? Do you how do you identify? I guess I should ask.
Typically gay or queer. If I'm introducing myself, I might say that I'm, a gay African-American woman, or I might say I'm a queer African-American woman.
Yeah. All right. Okay. Awkward question. What's the difference, or what's the commonality?
I just started feeling more comfortable with the term queer, just in probably the last 5 or 6 years. And I feel like it gives me a little more wiggle room, because I think that sexuality is really on a spectrum.
Mm.
And that spectrum goes from heterosexual to asexual, and everybody else falls in between.
Heterosexual to asexual. Interesting. Okay.
Yes.
And so queer means, I don't know
So
what that means.
queer means that I could have a connection with someone who is not necessarily someone who's non-binary. We'll put it that way.
Okay, hang on. Someone who's not, so meaning someone that doesn't identify as male or female.
Correct.
And okay, I got that.
Okay.
And I did last year, I did in my other podcast, Time to Come Alive, I did interview Lindsay Turstein, who might watch this. So Lindsay, if you do, I can't wait to hear what your thoughts are. Lindsay goes by their pronouns, they, their, and it was such a great education. We had such a fascinating conversation, and actually they shared with their parents the podcast, and that was like the introduction to their life. And it was such a like, wow, I'm glad that we had a conversation that was worthy of, hey, parents, mom, dad,
Watch this.
Yeah, watch this. This tells you more about, who I am, kind of thing. And it was like, whoa, cool. So I think, I don't know, these are the kind of conversations that hopefully people experience some level of freedom. The freedom that the two of you expressed is so important and been so meaningful to experience. But now we have longer stretches of it and in more areas of life. And, I want you to have fun and play at church, Bridget.
Absolutely.
To have freedom to be that, and for these street days, Reba and your neighbors, that goes beyond whatever it has been so far. So thank you. I can't say thank you enough for what you shared with me today, and for those of us that are listening and watching. And I'm going to share your contact information, if that's okay, LinkedIn or whatever is appropriate, so that people can connect and reach out to you if they have additional questions. We do have a gathering coming up for people who are interested in meeting some of our Not Quite Stranger guests and other listeners, but you have to be a subscriber to the notquitestrangers.com website. So make sure that you subscribe so that you get access to an invitation where you can join and meet some of our guests live. So looking forward to that. Yes. Any final words, ladies?
Well, thank you. Thank you for inviting me into this conversation. Thank you, Reba, for sharing. I've enjoyed it, and you proved our point. You were trustworthy with this conversation.
Absolutely, Valerie, and your incredible energy and curiosity bringing us together. I'm grateful, and Bridget, so wonderful to meet you.
Thank you.
Yay. More to come. Everyone else, thank you so much for joining us for another episode of Not Quite Strangers. Again, be sure to go to notquitestrangers.com so that you can subscribe and not miss a single episode in your inbox. You can also go to the YouTube channel, Connect to Joy, and there you'll get a notification anytime a new video is posted. So you don't want to miss out. Ladies, again, thanks again for joining us, and everyone else, have a wonderful rest of the day. Bye.
Wow.
You've been listening to the podcast Not Quite Strangers. Be sure to subscribe or follow on your favorite video or podcast platform. And for more information and content, go to notquitestrangers.com. See you next time.